Have you ever looked at a busy city intersection and just felt completely overwhelmed by the sheer amount of painted lines, signs, and concrete structures? Well, today, our goal is to decode the literal visual language of traffic laws. We are going to learn how to read the physical street like a book, because once you can do that, navigating complex driving rules becomes a whole lot easier.
To kick things off, I really want you to absorb this quote. Traffic law relies on precise definitions. If you do not understand the vocabulary, you cannot correctly interpret the rules. This hits the nail on the head. Without a foundational spatial vocabulary, traffic laws are always going to feel confusing, arbitrary, or just like a giant intimidating list of things to memorize. We're going to fix that today by translating those physical spaces into simple, understandable rules.
So here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll be going over the language of the road, the anatomy of public highways, the separation principle, diagnosing legal responsibilities, and finally, looking ahead to rules.
All right, Section 1, the language of the road, translating spaces into rules. So, a seemingly chaotic city intersection actually possesses an incredibly rigid underlying legal structure. If you just glance at a street, it looks like a flat stretch of pavement, right? But put on your X-ray glasses for a second and notice the distinct color-coded zones here. We've got the cyan active roadway, the yellow margins, and the green pedestrian zones. You can clearly see it's a highly structured legal space where every single inch serves a very specific purpose. Now, a huge misconception is that the road belongs exclusively to cars. It doesn't. A public road is fundamentally a shared transport ecosystem, legally open to a whole network of users: motor vehicles, motorcycles, bicycles, pedestrians, public transit, and emergency vehicles. It's a shared system, and managing that shared system safely requires strict spatial organization. Moving right along to Section 2, Anatomy of Public Highways, breaking down the 3D structure. Take a look at this 3D cross-section. It's fascinating because every public road is divided into distinct functional areas, and where you are physically located dictates exactly which traffic laws apply to you at that moment. Notice how physical elements create these boundaries. The footpath is physically separated by elevated curbs to protect pedestrians. Meanwhile, the roadway and the shoulder are separated just by painted lines on flat asphalt. This architecture isn't for aesthetics, it's literally the foundation of traffic law. So, to summarize quickly, there are 3 distinct functional areas we need to master. The roadway, which is managed by painted lines for vehicle flow, the shoulder, designated by solid lines for emergencies, and the footpath, physically separated by elevated curbs for pedestrians. Let's put each one of these under the microscope. Let's start with the roadway. This is the portion of the public road intended primarily for the movement of vehicles: cars, buses, trucks, you name it. This is where rules for overtaking, priority, and lane discipline actually apply. And notice the traffic lanes. These are just subdivisions of the roadway. So the crucial takeaway here is that lane markings are there to organize vehicles traveling in the same direction, to separate traffic, increase road capacity, and ultimately reduce collisions. Next up, check out the shoulder, highlighted here in yellow. This is the area directly adjacent to the roadway. Now, this is absolutely crucial. It is not intended as a normal driving lane. Its primary purposes are for emergency stopping, recovering from driving errors, providing space for disabled vehicles, and basically acting as an extra safety margin. Understanding this intended use explains instantly why driving on the shoulder to bypass a traffic jam is strictly illegal. Finally, guide your attention to the footpath, shown here in green. This is a public way specifically engineered and legally intended to protect vulnerable pedestrians. Whenever available, pedestrians should normally use it rather than walking on the roadway. This concept is so fundamental that it's often one of the very first things tested in a driving theory exam, knowing exactly who a footpath is legally designed for. Okay, Section 3, the separation principle, or why we actually separate road users. The entire concept driving modern road design is called the separation principle. It states that different speeds should be separated whenever possible to mitigate danger. It really just comes down to a simple rule of physics. The greater the speed difference between 2 road users, the higher the risk of a fatal collision. Let's visualize that. On this velocity and risk gradient, you have a pedestrian ambling along at roughly 3 kilometers per hour on the far left. On the far right, a car blasting by at 60 or more. That massive speed differential creates a severe collision risk, represented by this red zone. This is exactly why structures like footpaths and elevated curbs exist. They physically enforce separation to protect the most vulnerable users from high-speed traffic. This brings us to Section 4, diagnosing legal responsibilities, and how your location dictates your liability.
This right here is the principle of intended use in action. Imagine looking down at a busy shopping district from above. Users are super close together, but they occupy different parts of the road for distinct reasons. You have the active roadway in cyan, the emergency shoulder in yellow, and the pedestrian zones in green. Once you understand the intended purpose of each of these colored zones, seemingly arbitrary traffic laws suddenly become totally logical. You can literally start to predict hazards just by knowing where users belong.
Let's look at this diagnostic matrix because this is exactly where a lot of new learners get tripped up. Surprisingly, over half of test takers confuse the roadway, which is just for vehicle movement, with the entire public road, which actually includes everything from building line to building line, the whole shebang. Another huge mistake is believing the shoulder is just an extra driving lane when its actual intended purpose is solely for emergencies. If you can memorize the intended purpose of these elements, the rules practically write themselves.
Let's use our new X-ray vision to contrast two quick scenarios. In situation A, we have a pedestrian on the footpath. They are in their intended zone, they have the right-of-way and full legal protection. The driver's only real job there is maintaining lane discipline. But look at situation B, a pedestrian on the active roadway. Now they are outside their intended zone, which means both parties share heightened legal responsibilities. The driver has to adjust their speed, sure, but the pedestrian must yield or face liability for obstructing traffic. Location changes everything.
If you're ever unsure of a rule, just run it through this simple diagnostic flowchart. Just ask, what was this part of the road designed for? If an action matches the design, like driving a car on the roadway, it's a may. If it's the only designated safe zone for a user, like a pedestrian using an available footpath, it's a must. And if the action completely violates the intended safety objective, like using the shoulder as a passing lane, it's a must not. It's wonderfully logical when you break it down like this.
Finally, Section 5, looking ahead to rules, taking us from 3D space to 2D instructions. Here's the secret. When you take a driving test, examiners aren't just checking if you memorize vocabulary. They are testing the principle of intended use. When they ask which road users are primarily intended to use a footpath, they want to see if you grasp the safety objective behind it, separating vulnerable folks from fast cars. Those definition questions are testing your grasp of the fundamental legal framework upon which all the later rules, like parking and right-of-way, are actually built. Wrapping things up with this final visual to see how this builds your future knowledge. Understanding the physical 3D structure, the curbs, the roadway width, the shoulders, is just step one. The vocabulary is set. Next, you have to transition from physical spaces to visual 2D instructions. You'll use these spatial definitions to decode broken versus continuous white lines, lane reduction arrows, and edge lines. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Now that you can confidently read the 3D anatomy of the street, how will you use this X-ray vision to quickly decipher the painted instructions laid out right on top of it? Thanks so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep analyzing the road, and I'll see you next time.